morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm really happy to have you join us today. This is a new format for one of our series that we do at our company. And it'll be not only live casted to YouTube, but we will also be publishing it on some of the podcast formats. So as I go through today's session, the audience is twofold. One, it's you who are tuning in on YouTube Live and you're watching the video, but also if you're just listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, you will be able to follow along, hopefully, if I'm communicative enough. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Rahul Singh. I'm one of the principals at Anat Corporation. We do big data and analytics platforms that have a lot of overlap in AI. And the reason that I started this series was because I felt that I had to keep explaining to folks what is it, this revolution we're noticing, what does it actually mean for normal everyday people? And the revolution that I'm talking about is this convergence of no code, data, and AI. And as these things get easier and easier to use, how it can change the landscape of business, but also the landscape of work in general. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So just to give you a starting point of where I came up with this idea, I was actually starting to write a blog post and recognized that there's so much to explain and so much to continue to learn in explaining how AI can help in business. Artificial intelligence has been around for a while. It gets better and better. I've been researching AI for probably about 20 years. And at each stage, I kept getting disappointed. I would pick it up every few years and I would get disappointed at what it was able to do. And, a lot of the data science, machine learning folks would get excited about new models and new hardware and, TensorFlow and new ways to do, neural networks. And every single time I just would say, so what? What does it mean to me? And what does it mean to the everyday person? And when I mean me, yes, I work in a consulting company. A large part of my work is related to data and technology and business platforms. But a large part of my job is like everybody else's job. When somebody says, what do you do? Sometimes I jokingly say, I sit in front of a computer, I click my mouse around, and I type on the keyboard. Well, that basically describes most of the people that I know in my personal, social circles, and definitely in business circles. It doesn't matter if they're in technology or not. Pretty much everybody sits in front of a computer, types, moves their mouse around. And it wasn't until GPT came out, actually a few years ago, where the quality of what this AI was able to produce in terms of words, right? Using the typewriter and, we used to use the typewriter, we use keyboards now, which write, we write documents, we write books, we write briefs, we write summaries, we write code. It wasn't until GPT came out that I started to notice it and start to pay attention to it. And I think the tipping point for me personally was the same tipping point that most people have noticed, which is ChatGPT, when it came out and started to make that same API, maybe a little bit better, that was released a few years ago, make that available to normal people in a very easy to use interface. And when I was traveling to meet our team in Macedonia, I saw these folks using ChatGPT to help write code, help write content. And yeah, of course, I'd read the blog posts, watched some of the videos, but seeing somebody sitting next to me using it as an assistant, it changed my mind. And I also have the opportunity right now to help prototype an application, a platform that's really going to take advantage of large language models, amongst other data technologies. And so I had to dive deep personally. And as I dove deep, I recognize the potential for us as a company, as a small business, me as an individual, the people that work for us, how they could be better, how they could be faster, to produce better results internally and to our clients. And I've been using ChatGPT personally for things that people wouldn't necessarily have thought about earlier, but I was using it to say, hey, here's my goals for the year, and here's some of my projects. Can you prioritize these projects based on what you think I should do first? And prioritization is a very difficult task for me. I can focus when I want to, but it's really difficult to decide what I should focus on first, right? So this series came out as a yearning to explain what it's doing for me, what's doing for our business, to people that normally wouldn't pay attention to our other webinars, such as Data Engineers Lunch or Cassandra Lunch, where a very small group of people that work on the biggest data platforms may find that interesting. This material is really hopefully for the masses of folks, knowledge workers, professionals that could take advantage of this to make their life easier. At the crux of this, we're talking about large language models. There are other AI systems out there, some that do computer vision, audio recognition, audio generation, video generation, image generation. We'll touch on it a little bit, but what I'm focusing on specifically is large language models. Large language models, I'll explain in a second, but like GPT-3, they've disrupted the way that we think about knowledge work, meaning consumption of knowledge and creation of knowledge. And knowledge could be anything. It could be documents, it could be presentations, it could be webinars like this. In fact, I had ChatGPT help me for some parts of the material for this presentation. And the other part of which, the way I entered into it was, how can this help us do things that we were doing in a different way with AI, such as natural language processing, which is taking text and understanding what that text means in a way that makes it easier for other people to ask questions about that text, right? So there's a whole branch of data and analytics, and specifically machine learning, about natural language processing. And in the past, we would do, quote, real data science work, real data engineering work, where we would have to understand the data, featurize it, train a model, just like any other process of training a model in AI. And now with GPT, it changes the way we think about that, because given some information, it can do what we ask it to do. And that's the real power, I believe, behind ChatGPT specifically, but in general, or GPT in general, but also large language models, is that it takes the work that technical people were doing and makes it easier. Not just what non-technical people do for their job, but it makes it easier for both categories of workers. Just to give some credibility, I worked with a lot of large organizations on their business platforms, specifically how to deal with data at a global scale, real-time data specifically for their customer experiences. Sometimes they say, everybody wants to be like a Silicon Valley company, or they want to have an experience like Uber, and especially large organizations that are in their third or fourth transformation of their digital technology. They need the skills we have at our company, which is to build these platforms. And in that, we help folks operationalize data science models and machine learning models that take tons of information, sometimes in real time, and process it and give insights to business users, sometimes to make recommendations to customers on their customer experiences. So this stuff is close to home. And that's why it's exciting, because it's making that work a lot easier. The series agenda, I've taken the 10 or 12 bullet points that are on the meetup description for this particular event, and I organized it into 5 categories. And today we're going to focus on the first, which is just an introduction. And though it's an introduction, I would say every single section of today's talk could be its own hour-long presentation. And in fact, some of the slides, each slide could have an hour dedicated to it. So I apologize if you're an expert that I'm not getting too deep into this, that I'm at a fairly shallow level in explaining to folks what this is. At the same time, I feel that in order to really transmit this information, I do need to follow up. So there's going to be a series of talks on just the subject of automation in business and in work with GPT. And today's talk is just to set the baseline so that when I refer to certain terms in the future, you can always come back and listen to this again or watch this again. And it's also to just make sure that everybody, whether they're technical or non-technical, understand the lay of the land, the survey of what is out there. So if anything I want from you today is to take away some actions that basically will help you, whether it's to use one of the OpenAI tools, the API or the ChatGPT, or it's to use one of the tools based on ChatGPT, or if you have some technical chops, connecting the API to some no-code platform. And that's what I needed in the beginning. I spent a while to learn all this stuff, but I wish somebody had just given this to me from a top-down fashion. And so that's what I'm looking to do today, is to give you the top-level, high-level view of what's going on. And so when we dive deeper, if you're interested in joining me again, you'll learn more in-depth knowledge of what I'm seeing in the industry. It's not just something I know. I'm learning from all the other practitioners out there. There's a lot of trailblazers out there that have been doing this a lot longer than I have, and hope to actually bring on a few of them in the future to talk about their innovations and their products. And what you see here is that this is the OpenAI logo, commonly misinterpreted as the GPT logo. GPT is just one of the models in their offerings. Cohere is another competitor that does similar things to OpenAI GPT, and Bloom is an open source large language model that's available. And the reason I mentioned this, and I'm not going to really talk about Cohere or Bloom today, we'll have to pick it up later. The reason I mentioned this right now is that if you're thinking, oh, you know what, I don't want to be dependent on OpenAI to do X, Y, Z, that's completely fine. There are competitors that do what GPT does. And then you could also say, well, I don't want to necessarily send my information to a third party because it's sensitive information. And that's also okay, because you can use an open source model that you can host and run yourself to do this. And that's more advanced. That's a whole different discussion. We'll get there. So today's agenda is, threefold: getting you on board to understanding what I'm excited about, the convergence of no code or low code, data, which has been in tech for forever. Every quote unquote startup is just a basic database application. That's why no code tools that make it easy to get data in and out can help people create startups really quickly. And then AI has been around for a while. As I mentioned earlier, it's just gotten better and better. But when we converge this no code ability to create things really quickly, the ability to store and manage data at scale without having a lot of technical chops to run really large platforms, because there's lots of cloud services available. And then with the AI APIs that are available, things that would have taken somebody like me that's got a lot of experience with this stuff, months, maybe 3 to 6 months to build it out by hand alone, every single part of it, the interface, the user interface, the API layer, the data, the machine learning components of it, deploying it on the cloud, right? All of that stuff has incrementally gotten better. And when you combine all of that with what's available today, the same application that would have taken 3 months to create takes me an afternoon. And I'm not BSing here. I've done several prototypes with different technologies. And once I know what I want, once I have the general design or architecture in my mind, or on paper, or on like a diagram, building it out is actually very quick. It doesn't take that long. You have to obviously know the tool, but it's relatively quick. The second thing I want to talk about today is what are the possibilities with GPT today? And some of these possibilities are based on our experience, my experience, also what I've seen out there in the internet, on YouTube, on blog posts. And then the third is, and I hope that every single episode of this series, you find something you can act on. And that's the goal of the last section, which is showing you something you can do today, learn something today, but act on it today to help it stick with you. And hopefully by the next time you come around, you're adept at one of these tools I recommend to you. And maybe you're able to add to the conversation, and maybe future episode, we have you come and talk about what you have done. No code, low code is exploding. This is a projection of in billions, essentially how much of the work is now low code, right? Low code is where you have to know some programming, but it's mostly point and click to create applications, automations, and there's lots of categories of no code applications out there. And then by 2025, it's supposed to get to about 45 billion. So this is not a fashion that's going to come and go. This is not just a trend that's going to come and go. It's a paradigm shift, I would say. And no code, started a long time ago, and that's I would say low code has been around ever since Visual Basic, but low code, no code on the web has gotten fairly mature recently for entrepreneurs, freelancers to quickly create applications. But the same general concepts are now in big companies. So I would say Salesforce is kind of like a no-code, low-code platform. Microsoft has its own low-code, no-code platform called Power Apps. There's another category of software that really makes it easier to connect different existing software out there. And those are integration, low-code and no-code integration tools like Zapier and Make. And then finally, what I mentioned just a second ago, right? There are already so many applications out there that do something. So creating a new automation or a business application, it's really not about making something yourself. It's about assembling things together and maybe putting a facade over it. And that's just the way even very complex software works. We take a lot of little small quote unquote microservices and we put them together to create value for the customer. Convergence is generally when two or three different things come together, right? That's what convergence is. And in the past, there have been trends of technologies that are rising, other ones that are maybe coming down, a few that are rising not as fast. And what I've noticed is this no-code data possibilities with data in general and the AI capabilities, with the addition of generative AI, specifically GPT, it takes both no code and data and adds jet fuel to it. It makes it much easier to go from really low fidelity prototypes to very high quality prototypes, from taking a business process that you're doing by hand that you would then use ChatGPT to do manually, semi-automatically, to take that and operationalize it in a way that 100 people in your company could use that automation. That ability is relatively new. And it's because of the API. So technically it was there about a couple of years ago, but it's a lot cheaper. In fact, OpenAI released their ChatGPT model, which is different from their GPT model. And the cost of creating the first GPT that was out there about in 2020, 2021, it was, one of my coworkers says, $4.5 million. To train the same model or the next iteration of the model, it was only $450,000. And I say only because it's a tenth of the price. Well, the price for their best model used to be 3 cents essentially per word that it was doing for you, roughly 3 cents. And now it's 0.002, right? It's a tenth of the cost. So making things with lots of information would have cost dollars every time you're doing some sort of interaction with the API would cost you money. Now it's going to cost you much less money. And the competition with companies like Cohere is just going to drive the price down of these technologies. App creation, automation, integration. We'll cover this in a second. Most people have heard about Bubble or Webflow. WordPress is a very common app that's used for websites. It has a lot of no-code tools now built into it. Zapier, Make/integromat, these are consumer-level integration tools, but there's things like Workato or Tray on the enterprise. These make it easier to connect applications together, make applications. And finally, generative AI, right? When I talk about GPT, it's in a family of AIs called generative AI. It creates things for us. And more specifically, it's a large language model. So it works with words, so English, or I think there's like maybe 20 languages that GPT can work with. And then there's APIs that give us access to that technology without having to use our own browser and manually copy and paste prompts and get some responses. So the barrier to big data and machine learning has been coming down for a long time. This is from First Mark Capital. It's the MAD landscape, machine learning, AI and data. And if you go into just data and analytics, it's actually a much larger landscape. But in this big diagram, when we zoom in, these are models that are closed source. They're not available necessarily that you can download and use it. You're going to pay for use. So we have OpenAI DALL-E, which creates images. We have GPT-2, GPT-3, and Google will eventually release their model. Facebook has kind of open sourced their model. They're only giving it to researchers right now. OpenAI Codex, it creates code given some input. There's lots of great things that are out there in this closed source model. And by the way, I'm a hardcore open sourceist, but honestly, if it cost, a tenth of, a cent or tenth of a cent to do something, and my cost is just to use it, I would rather do that than to host something myself, or even tell our customers to do that, because that stuff is commoditized, right? It's commoditized. There's no reason to reinvent that wheel. So data sets are available on the cloud. In fact, the data set that was used to train GPT is available. It's called the Common Crawl database, which is available on Amazon's big hard drive called S3. If you have the computational power, or you can buy it on a cloud, you can download the whole internet. I don't know exactly which dates to which date, and train your own model if you wanted to. Then there's tons of other data sets available too. Either you can buy it or subscribe to it, or download it because it's open. Machine learning data science as a service. It used to be that you would have to create your own models for natural language processing, or your own models for voice recognition. But actually, for a while, I would say 10 years or so, I've seen good natural language models available. So IBM bought a company called Zemanta. Now that is called Watson Natural Language Understanding. And then even before GPT, there is actually AWS Cognitive Services, Microsoft Cognitive Search. There's a lot of technology that's been in this space for a while, but primarily for understanding what it is, not necessarily interacting in a bot or chatbot fashion. And that's what really makes things easier today. But the technology has been there. But what I'm saying is not just limited to that. There's some AI model that somebody is serving up as an API that you don't have to recreate. And that's already there. You just have to do the research. And you can actually talk to ChatGPT and say, hey, if I were to want to process this type of information or do this type of automation, what is a machine learning model that I can run myself? Or what is an app that I can run myself? And to back everything, eventually you have to store information in your system somewhere. And the ability to store and manage information at large scale has become very easy with what the cloud providers provide, as well as some of the database companies with their cloud offerings. And when you bring all this together, what only the biggest companies in the world could do, very, very tiny 1-person, 5-person companies can do if they have the funding. And the knowledge is not as esoteric because it's just easy to use now. This is a slightly old landscape of just no-code, low-code applications. It's from 2021. I couldn't find a more current one, and I frankly don't have the time to make a more current one. But if I zoomed into just 2 areas, right? If I zoomed in today, these website and web app builders would have probably 20 more logos, maybe 100 more logos on there. Mobile app builders, probably there's 100 more of those. Automation, business process, workflow automation, business process automation, integration platform as a service is another term for things like Make. There's some that are for very, very large companies, some that are for small companies. So Zapier is one that anybody can use, right? So if you are building a platform and you have already 5 or 6 apps, I mean, I would think that any company now, even if you're a 1-person company, you have like your accounting software, your CRM, if you're that advanced, you have your Google Drive, you have your email. So automatically you have 5 apps that you're using. And if there's any workflow in there, there's probably an API that's available. So there's an app that does everything. There's an app that does something out there so that if you need to do it, it's out there, right? So, but there's an app for everything. Excuse me, that's what I meant. There's an app for everything. And I'm not talking about like iPhone apps. I'm talking about a web app for business, which may have an iPhone app. Integration automation is very easy today with things like Zapier. So when you have, let's say, a CRM, and when that deal converts into an account, you can have an automation to say, put this into my QuickBooks as a new company, new client, right? Those automations are possible using Zapier and Make. These are the 2 that I'm very familiar with. And then if existing applications and these integrations don't work out of the box, which I think most use cases they will, there are application platforms that allow you to create custom applications without programming. So actually a system like Salesforce, they have their own apps for managing customers and leads and opportunities, but you can make your own apps in Salesforce. You can make your own apps in, let's say, a tool like Zoho App Creator. These are very commonly used technologies. But you normally wouldn't use that to make a consumer-facing application, right? Something your customer would use, or like a partnering company would use. With tools like Bubble, Flutter, Softer is one that I've used recently. It's very easy to bring up an application that looks good to the outside world in like no time, right? So when you combine existing applications, being able to connect them together, and also make your own apps that talk to this system that you're building for your organization to automate things in your business, there really is very little reason to write code. And I'm a technologist, but I hate programming. I absolutely hate programming. I'm okay at it. And the reason I hate programming is because that's not my goal. My goal is to create value for the customer. And if I can use something that's easy to use to create value for the customer, I would rather do that. And no code and low code, good tools are very easy for somebody else to come along and maintain that application later, right? Because changing a data model and changing the API and changing the front end layer for an application, that's a lot of work. Or I could use a no-code, low-code platform where I say add a field and then be able to go to the user interface and say show this information to the customer, to the user. So I'm a big proponent of no-code. It's not for every use case. I think that internal applications can be built really well with these apps out there, especially if you're going to automate something with GPT. Consumer-facing applications, the jury is still out for me on which is good enough. But what I see is that there's things that you begin with, and then you iterate to, and then you iterate to, and eventually you may want to make a native application that's built on iOS or Android. or you may want to make a custom application that's built on React or Angular because the speed isn't there for you. But all this technology is getting better and better by the day. Generative AI it's also referred to as Gen AI. It very simply means, it creates things for you. It generates things for you. And it could be, it creates content, essays. I mean, there's a whole, controversy with school students and college students and how they should be graded now that they can get help from an AI. Images. There's another controversy with artists saying, hey, my whole industry is upended now. Nobody hires me to make art anymore because you can just tell a machine to do it for you, and it does a really good job. And then there's tools that combine text generation with finding videos, and basically you give it a topic, it can create a script, and it can create a YouTube video for you. Now, there's some accuracy issues, there's some quality issues, but you would expect the same thing with a junior employee, right? You don't expect the world of them. And in fact, just like a junior employee, the better you train that junior employee, the better input you give that junior employee of what is expected, the better the outcome is going to be. And that's the way I look at these assistants, these generative AIs. It's like a savant. It's got all the knowledge of whatever, let's say we're talking about GPT. It has all the knowledge of the internet until 2020, because that's when it was last trained, or maybe 2021, depending on which version you're using. And given a question, it will give you an answer with the same quality of the question you gave it. Now, that's Gen AI. It can do, there's different Gen AIs out there. Text, image, audio, code, chatbots, you name it, right? Large language models are one part of the generative AI landscape. And that means in the text space. And you could also say there's bleed over into the code space, and as well as some bleed over into the chatbot space, because these are basically using the text models that are out there. And then the most popular ones that people are talking about, ChatGPT, it's not the actual language model, although there's one API that's released. ChatGPT is an app that OpenAI made using their own API to create a very easy experience for most people. Jasper is a tool out there that uses a large language model. It's been there for a while. You can use it to write blog posts, write proposals, and it's got a wizard. So it gives you these templates, and you give it some questions, and it does it for you. Well, if you had the knowledge that I'm talking about, which is some low code, no code experience, and some app design experience, you could recreate Jasper for your company. Now, I don't know why you would want to do that, because Jasper is not that expensive, but you could create Jasper if you wanted to. Writer is a competitor to Jasper. It's a lot cheaper. And then for images, there's DALL-E, again, by OpenAI, and then there's Midjourney. And DALL-E and Midjourney, given a prompt, will create a picture for you. And we're not going to cover that today, but these are popular terms. If somebody says, do you know about Midjourney? There's another one called Stable Diffusion. You can Google it. You can try it out. You can try all of these out, actually, for free. So what are the possibilities with GPT today, right? So you can use ChatGPT, but there's other tools, and we'll talk about those. Automating the automation with API and no-code tools. So if you become good at ChatGPT, you get good at it, you can automate that knowledge and give it to more people, or you can just make your job a lot easier. And then the advanced possibilities with these large language models, because they're limited, because they have only so much information, it's a lot, but it doesn't have the most current information. You can augment the large language model like GPT with your own data. And that's called data augmented generative AI, meaning it's taking your information as an input. And because it's taking your information as an input, it will be as accurate as the data that you give it. And it's not just stuff that it's making up. In fact, there's a term in large language models, or in even any generative AI, you ask a question and it just quote unquote hallucinates. it creates things out of thin air. I've had a few different instances where I say, how do I do this with this component and this component? And because that component was just coming out at the time this model was trained, it surmises certain websites that I could go to where I could purchase a product or subscribe to a service, and that product has never existed. So I would challenge it, and I would say, this site doesn't work. It's, the site may have been taken down. It's basically lying to me. It's giving me the best response it can. And we'll talk about that, but how to get what you want from an AI is very similar to getting what you want from a human being. Human beings will also BS you and give you BS and lie to you if they don't know what's going on. And it's not like there's any malcontent on the part of the creators of the AI. When you get into the actual mechanism of why this thing works in the first place, you'll understand why it hallucinates these things, because it's just trying to do a good job for you. It's trying to create text for you. It's trying to give you the best answer it possibly can. This is probably the most important slide, and I'm sorry for the folks that are listening to this. I'm going to try to explain it in a way that makes sense if you're just listening as well as if you're watching this. So what exactly is GPT? So let's first just re-summarize. It's a generative AI, right? Given a prompt, it creates things for us. It's also an AI model, and an AI model is relatively generic. In fact, I would say an AI model is the generic term, and then the generative AI is the specific type of AI model. But an AI model it's an algorithm that's trained with data. Artificial intelligence and machine learning act different from regular programs. A regular program, you say, here's my input, and here's my expected output, and you write the code to make that happen. In machine learning and AI, you say, here are my inputs and here are my correct outputs. And the more data you feed that model, the better it gets, right? So an AI model is generally in that second category, and there's different categories such as unsupervised learning, supervised learning, where you have potentially humans saying, here's the right answer, but every time it trains, you can always go back and give it more information to continue making it better and better and better. More specifically, GPT is a large language model in the world of AI models. It is not an image creation model because it just deals with text, only text. You give it text, it gives you back text. You ask a question and the right answer is going to be code, it spits out code because code is text. Now, people say, oh, I can get ChatGPT or GPT to write code for me for a website. Well, technically, a website is just text. It's code. Now, it's not going to be able to give you pictures, but it may recommend insert picture of a person working at a computer. And you can go to Unsplash and find it. Or maybe you use DALL-E or Midjourney to automatically create it. And some of the tools I'm going to show you are mashups of image and text generators together in different ways. And finally, what does GPT stand for? Some people say, what is GTP? What is GPT? What is ChatGPT? GPT specifically stands for Generative Pretrained Transformer. Generative because it's a generative AI. Pre-trained because it was already trained. It's not getting trained on that whole internet every day, right? It was trained on this massive data set. It costs a lot of money to train this model. And it's a transformer. And a transformer is it's a type of, I want to say a pattern of how you do neural networks in deep neural network learning, where it has made making these models much more efficient and much more accurate. And that's all I can talk about today because it's a very deep subject. And you can Google, there's tons of different transformers out there based on the paper for transformer. So what is GPT doing? Given a request, there is a potential of anything. Like if you consider what it's doing, it's just creating characters and words and it's giving back to you. You ask a question, you give it a prompt, it gives you back text, right? So technically, if it wasn't that great, it could just give you garbage text, right? And I would say garbage text completely that doesn't make, it's just gibberish, right? Numbers and characters, etc. I would say that's chaos. So first and foremost, the large language model eliminates responses that are chaos. So that shrinks the size of the universe of things it could give to you. And how does it do that? It does it because the data that it scraped from the internet or used a common crawl, it showed this neural network how people write in English and how when people ask a question and they're given an answer, what that answer should look like, or given a description of code and the code, what that code should look like, right? So it's been trained on billions, trillions of data points to basically, given a particular prompt, it's completing that for you. And that's why it's called a completion API. It's generating the rest of that text so that it would make sense, because it's trained on things that are outside on the internet that make sense. Okay. Now, again, you could have garbage in English. You could say, can you show me how to get to Sesame Street from Washington, D.C.? And the garbage you would get back to me is, this is how you make, sesame pudding or something like that, right? It's English, but it's garbage in English for me because it's not really useful for me, right? So a good large language model, it's actually going to give me something in English that it makes sense. Now, probable responses in language, that was a huge step. For it to be able to even create English or code was a big step. But for it to be able to give me responses that make sense for me, that's a huge step. And that's why it's really popular now, because it's making sense to us. But even smaller in that universe is a response that makes sense and it makes me happy. It's what I need. It's what I want. Okay. And the better your prompt is, the better your response is going to be. Now, there are times, because the GPT API, because it doesn't have access to the whole internet, in order for it to give you a good response, you have to give it data. And in this diagram is this little question mark with a circle around it. That's where you can insert information, source information, so that the answer it gives you is exactly what you need. And we'll show some examples of it. So the magic behind GPT is not just that you ask a question and it gives you stuff. The real magic is you give it very specific information, very specific examples, and it gives you very specific answers back. Because if you're thinking about automating a business process or you're automating a process for your job, you want it to be predictable, right? You don't want it to be randomly giving you stuff that doesn't really make sense. So generative AI for business, at least in this series, we're talking about text and code. And there are generative AIs for text, code, images, video, 3D gaming. Again, we're not going to talk about that. But for business, right? Marketing, content, sales, email, support, chat, conversations, just general writing, note taking. The text models make sense, right? So OpenAI is one of them. Hugging Face Bloom is the open source one that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. Cohere is another one that I mentioned earlier, and there's going to be more. And as you can see, the text models, there are way more text models than there are image models. Actually, OpenAI just released an API called Whisper, where it can take voice and transcribe it into text, and it actually works pretty well. So OpenAI does different models. We're thinking about just OpenAI text GPT, right? The GPT-3 model, which is a large language model. In code, and this is really fascinating to me, is that given a prompt, it can create code. And I did an experiment where I said, here's the data that I need to manage in a database with a user interface that does this, this, and this. Write me the code to create the database. Write me the code to create the API in this language. Write me the code for the front end in React. Write me the code to deploy this application at scale using some DevOps tooling I gave it. And one by one, it was able to give it to me. Now, it wasn't something I could completely copy and paste and make it work, but it was pretty damn good. It was like 95% of the way there. Same thing with sales, emails, marketing content. I find it that the better your prompt is, the better the answer it's going to give. And this is this kind of conversation that you're going to have with this AI to get better at talking to the AI. Right now, the text can give longer form second drafts, meaning you give it a draft and it gives you a better expanded version of it. Maybe later on, it can use the data from specialized data sets and give you really good looking, ready to go documents. 2025, maybe the first draft is better than the human average. And maybe by 2030, the first draft is better than professional writers. We're not there yet. It's not that good. You can't just use what it spits out at you. You can continue tuning it for specific use cases, but it's not that great. It's good enough to save you time, but it's not good enough to completely replace your job. And what I heard from, I think Tom Bilyeu had a talk about this, and everybody on YouTube talks about GPT now because, like, we're talking about GPT, because that's how you get views, right? But he said something that I really identify with, because I say something similar. He said, your job is not going to be taken over by an AI. Your job is going to be taken over by somebody that knows how to use AI. And what I say to us, here where I work at Anant, we're either going to be building robots or we're going to be maintaining them. We're a technology company. But I think any business that's out there today, because you think about it, any business of any consequence, of any size, any substance, they're all technology companies. They have a technology platform. It's called a business platform, digital technology business platform, right? So business platform is short for digital technology business platform. And everybody has it. There's no real company that does not have IT. And the same way, in the near future, there's not going to be any real company that's not going to use AI, that's not going to use some of this automation. And professional workers, especially in the knowledge space, unless they choose to be specifically artists, right? And I still think that there's going to be a gap in the creativity of what humans can do and what the AI can do. Most people, their jobs are going to be better done. Their old jobs are going to be better done by the AI, and knowing how to work with the AI is going to make them successful. So what's there right now for marketing use cases? So using like ChatGPT itself, right? If you just open up a browser and Google ChatGPT, you'll land up on OpenAI's website. You can start by just saying, hey, can you help me write a blog post on XYZ? Or can you help me write an outline? And it'll do it for you. Until recently, you would use a software like Jasper to do it. And Jasper is powered by something like, I think it is powered by GPT. For sales proposals, you could say, here's my last proposal that I sent to the customer, and here's what the customer wanted. Can you rewrite a new proposal for this new customer? There are limits. And those limits are right now about 3,000 words. So the size of your prompt, how many words you give it, and the size of the response that you get back is limited to 3,000 words. Roughly speaking, it's about 4,000 tokens for the best model. Now, the larger, there are models that do 8,000 tokens, which is 6,000 words, but they're not as good. But the better ones, it's about 3,000 words. And so what these tools like Jasper and Writer that are based on GPT, what they do is they give you templates to do step one, make an outline. And then you click on the title and you say, write this section out. So it writes a paragraph, right? So what you would have had to do using ChatGPT, these writing tools are making it easier because they have a UI focused on content writing, etc. There's also UIs like Tomy.app, where you give it a topic and it will make a presentation for you. And it will even create images using DALL-E or Midjourney to accompany your presentation. Okay. And then I think that this is the third category, has been not as well documented or recorded online. Hopefully we'll do a little bit of that in this series, is consulting in the way that we technical consulting, taking notes from a customer and making it into a requirements document, taking the requirements and making it into a technical specification that actually is credible, taking a specification and having it create architecture. Now you're saying it can't draw diagrams, but guess what? There are diagramming languages like Mermaid and Plant UML that are text, and it actually can create that. And I've done that actually. It not only can understand my general goal for like a workflow and create a Mermaid or a Plant UML diagram, it can actually take code from my diagram and write an explanation of what the diagram does. And so I like making diagrams. I've been using it to create an architecture in Mermaid and say, hey, can you write 3 paragraphs about this so that somebody can just read it to understand it? And then code, right? I mentioned that earlier. I think it's a little amateurish to go and just say, write me code for something like XYZ. I think the same approach you use for building large scale applications, where you do understand some requirements, some specification, understanding the goal, and you have some domain expertise for how this thing should be put together, right? If you have your own domain knowledge about an industry or a technology area, the better you're going to be able to ask the machine what you want, and the better the response is going to be. I liken it to, good technical professionals are good communicators, and they can become good leaders, and they can become good managers. Well, why can they become good leaders and why can they become good managers? Is because they can teach junior people how to do something, or they can teach junior people, or they can explain things to junior people. So again, thinking about the assistant as like this chat program as an assistant, and having some empathy that it doesn't necessarily know everything. It just knows how to create text for you. So you give it as much information as you can within the limits of those token limits, and it will give you a good answer. So here's an example. This was output by a plugin, which I'll mention later, where I said, I want a SEO strategy for Cassandra migration and upgrades, because we do that at our company, right? And it gave essentially about 30 different topics that we should write about. Now, I could take this and say, write me a blog post for this, and it could do that for me too. This topic list may look familiar if you saw the meetup description. I took my first draft of my blog post that I was writing initially, before I was even thinking about this, and I said, hey, if I were to do a meetup, could you make a series of topics that I could talk about? And essentially, it created this list. So ChatGPT helped me co-write the description for this meetup. Automating the automation is much simpler to explain than it is to do, but it takes some practice, and I think anybody can pick it up. So prompt engineering is knowing how to ask the questions. There's lots of I think, blog posts, videos about prompt engineering. There's a tool I'll mention again later, which has a prompt database of, last time I checked, 1,400 prompts across various different business areas. Prompt automation is when you take that prompt and you can repeat it through some sort of technology where you're not necessarily involved in copying and pasting it into ChatGPT and getting an answer. And then finally, app and data integration is where you take the input of the user, save it somewhere. You then use the API to execute some prompt on that user's input. You take the data back and you save it. And so that's where the low code, no code stuff comes in, right? So if you know that this is a business process, it takes this type of question to get this type of answer, and then the user needs to give me this input, you can operationalize that. Example of prompt engineering. So this is from a tool out there for prompt management, where the way it works is you give it an input and the example output. So in this case, this is just unstructured text, and it says, please create a table of fruits from this area. And this is the right answer that it's expecting based on this input. Now, if you give it more examples, the better. The next time you say, given this text, give me a table of why, it will actually go ahead and do that. Here's one where, given a superhero name, it creates an origin story. So this prompt, engineer has given actually only two, right? Wonder Woman and Superman. And so the prompt here is, if you give it a superhero name, it will give you an origin story. So prompt engineering is another topic. Here's one that I'm showing here based on some requirements assessment. So, given a particular user story, it creates what we call a modern enterprise inventory of the people, the processes, the information, and systems that are involved in that user story, right? And normally when we talk to customers, we write this stuff down, we then go and manually create this outline. But if we were just talking to a customer, or maybe we record our Zoom meeting, we could take this transcription of the Zoom meeting and say to the machine, write me a modern enterprise inventory of this conversation, and it could do it. Now, I haven't done that yet, but that'd be kind of cool. Here's an example of using prompt engineering to get code. So I say, I have a piece of code, which is setting the context, right? And I give it some code, and I say, I would like to take, and there's some field called context. I would like it, and I would like you to write me code to use OpenAI's GPT API to get me back some information about the content that I'm giving it. And I say, can you give this to me? And it actually will give it to you. So there's a structure to prompt, which is you set up your context, you give it some input. Sometimes they're examples, sometimes there's just more input that it can use. And then you ask it exactly what you're looking for. Here's another one. I'm not going to get into it, but it's slightly different because I gave it another requirement. I said, I'm doing something with Beautiful Soup Library, which scrapes the internet. I want you to take it, and I want you to do the same thing. Prompt automation does not require you to program anymore. If you know the prompt, using tools like Make or Zapier, you can take inputs from a database, run them through OpenAI, and then save them back to a database. This is a Make scenario. As long as you know what your inputs and outputs are, and you provide refined prompts with specific examples, and you use a no-code automation that's already there with OpenAI integration, right? So you don't have to manually connect to it. You can take any process that you've defined and make it accessible to your team or to your customers. Here's an example of how you can take the whole ecosystem of no-code apps and bring them together. So Bubble for your front end, Make for your processing information, saving it to a database, OpenAI for your LLM. You could do magic with this combination of apps here, right? The interface being, what are the users going to use? So we'll use Bubble. Software, what are we going to do with the information? How are we going to execute against OpenAI? We're going to use Make for that. Where's that data going to go? Okay, we're going to use Airtable, which is a no-code database. And then what other systems need to be connected? Maybe I want to send an email. And something like Make or Zapier can do that for you. So we're coming up on the hour, but I want to finish strong with something that you can do today, right? I want to empower you with things you can use today to get started without, or actually I would say get started depending on your comfort level, right? So consumer apps are for folks that don't know how to program, don't want to know how to program. They could care less. They're never going to need to do any programming at their company. Probably there are many people like that. I would say there's tons of consumer apps that can do stuff for you today. Automating with no code, meaning one level of technical skill above somebody who doesn't know how to program, would be somebody who knows how to think logically and point and click a sequence of things, but not necessarily, they probably know how to program, but just had to learn it in school, but they don't necessarily practice it. And then finally, if you are a programmer, if you are a developer, how can you write intelligent apps that are really great? So ChatGPT, no brainer. You can go log in. It has some sample prompts. WebGPT is a plugin for Chrome, where if you ask a question and you have it turned on, it will first go to Google to get answers, relevant information, and then it will summarize those answers for you. That's useful because ChatGPT does not have current information. AI PRM is probably the best plugin that I've seen for Chrome for GPT. That's the one that has about 1,400 prompts available across marketing, sales, SEO, I mean, you name it, productivity. it's got prompts, and you can actually contribute. And you can also have your own prompt database, so you can kind of automate what you're doing. Write Sonic, it combines text and images using image generation. So that's kind of fascinating, right? You give it some text, it gives you text. You can say, make me a picture of whatever, and it will give you a picture. Jasper and Writer are very popular content writing tools. They have templates for, let's say, a Facebook ad or a blog post. And then recently made very widely available are AI assistants inside productivity tools like Notion. So in Todoist, for example, you can say, hey, what do I want to accomplish? And it will suggest tasks for you to accomplish that goal, which is a chore, right? If you're a GTD fanatic, right? Breaking down a project is a chore. And then I don't have a screenshot for it, but Poe by Quora, if you go to your app, I think it's on iOS and Android, but I may be wrong. Poe by Quora is the easiest large language model. I don't know if they use GPT. They may be using GPT, but it is the best app I've seen in the market. It's better than the Bing chat app that nobody has access to yet. Poe is accessible with everybody right now. And it has different personas of bots that you can talk to. You can also share your response or your conversation in the community, and you can see what other people have shared. And you can learn from other people's examples of how to do better prompt engineering. So between AI PRM and Poe, I would say just get that installed, and you're not going to regret it. No code apps, I would say you can start with Bubble and use the API connector. So here's a screenshot of how you would talk to the OpenAI completions API, right? You can use Flutterflow, which I recently played with in a similar way. Flutterflow creates native applications, whereas Bubble creates web applications that could be responsive. Automations, I have the most experience with Make and Zapier. I know there are other ones out there. There's some open source ones out there, but between Make and Zapier, you can basically do anything. There's really, in my opinion right now, nothing better. I think there's a few for companies that have more data coming in, and they would elect to use something that can handle more data and not be as expensive. These things can handle the data. They're just going to get expensive for you if you have a lot of information coming in and out. And then this is relatively new, this prompt to API. So the screenshots I was showing of my prompts earlier, they're from a tool called Every Prompt, where you have some sample prompts here. And when you create a prompt in Every Prompt, you can make it available as an API. And you put your own key in there, so it charges you from OpenAPI, and you pay a flat fee, OpenAI, and you just pay a flat fee to Every Prompt. I think that's how they are. And then Promptable is another competitor to Every Prompt. So between how you make the app, the automations to execute complex scenarios, if you need to do that, and with a prompt manager, you can automate most user to technology interactions, most of them, not everyone. The only drawback with these no-code platforms is that they're not like that, right? They're not like the Uber app, which actually sucks sometimes, but they're not as smooth. So if you use the Poe application, it's a very smooth experience. That's a native application. Unless you build it with Flutter, you're not going to get the same experience. And then for folks that are feeling adventurous, that want to integrate their own data into their chatbots, there are some tools that, again, they don't require necessarily programming, but you do need to know how to get the right data into, with some low code or no code, to get it into the system. So there's a product that came up on Product Hunt called Custom GPT, where it scrapes or crawls your website, and it makes a chatbot that is an expert at the content that you have on your website. So if a customer comes to your site and they're talking to a little bot avatar on your website, and it is connected to Custom GPT, then it can technically answer any question that's answered on your content on your website, right? Cognitos, similar. Actually, I learned about Cognitos because I put this talk out on Meetup, and somebody contacted me and said, "Hey, we do this, so we'll have to have them on our episode at some point, on our podcast at some point." Kappa is one that's meant for developer communities, and it takes documents, chat history in Slack or Discord, blogs, forums, YouTube videos, and it interprets all that and makes a knowledge base for developers to use a particular product, right? And the way it's exposed is it becomes a little bot in Discord or Slack. So people can just ask it questions. So you don't have to necessarily use developer knowledge. It could be internal documents, blogs, internal chat conversations. And it's an assistant available to you within your company, within your group of people. Agent HQ is just a new tool I actually encountered a couple of weeks ago. And Agent HQ is built on a technology called LangChain. But Agent HQ allows you to use the concepts of LangChain to make API chatbots that can use external data. That is not just limited to these documents or a website, but you can connect it to things like the weather service. You can connect it to your own APIs. You can connect it to Google Drive. You can connect, I don't know if you can do it to Google Drive, but I think you can do everything that GPT index can do. You can connect it in Agent HQ. And I've tried it out and it works pretty well. And then finally, LangChain and GPT index, which Agent HQ is based on, and a lot of other software is based on. These are Python libraries that can be used to create a chain of conversations with external systems to give a better experience for the user. So LangChain and GPT index allow us to gather our own data and make that data available to the user in the form of a conversation. So when I ask a question, it uses OpenAI or Cohere to understand what I'm asking for. It then looks at a context that I've set to say, if I'm looking for, food reviews, go to this API on Yelp, or restaurant reviews. If I'm looking for weather information, go to this API from the weather service. And the data, after it comes back, it summarizes it. And what's cool about LangChain is if you watch it run, it can take a complex question, break it into smaller parts in terms of what it needs to know to answer your question, and then ask those questions to those different systems, and then summarize it and bring it back. So for example, there's a math component and there's a Wolfram Alpha API integration, where if you ask it very complex math questions, it's not going to go to GPT, because GPT is not that great at math. It'll go to Wolfram Alpha. Or if you ask it a very simple math question, it will just use GPT. But if it's more complex, it will actually use Python to execute that math. It actually takes your question and it tells GPT, write me Python code to answer this question. It executes it, gets the answer back, and gives it to you. So the possibilities, I think, with LangChain are endless. But what it really does is it makes these companies not that special. Because using things like Agent HQ, using things like LangChain, you can basically do what these guys are doing if you wanted to. So key takeaways: don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to make your own custom GPT if custom GPT does things for you. You don't need to make your own every prompt or promptable prompt engine if it does it for you. The only reason why you would need to do that is sensitive information. There's tons of stuff out there. Prompt engineering is a good one to Google. Download AI PRM. You can learn a lot from that. You have to use your brain. The better you are at problem solving, analysis, and if you're technical in architecture skills, all of this is still relevant. The better you are at that, the better questions you're going to be able to ask in the right sequence and get the right answers back. Think of ChatGPT or GPT as a general helper. It gets you 80 to 90% of the way there. The API is not as general. You have to give it exactly what you're looking for, and it's going to give you some answer back. But if you combine the Open AI API with something like LangChain and your data, you can get exactly what you want, whether it's in a business process or it's in a chat conversation. So automation, as we've been talking about, could be user data comes in, goes into some sort of database, some process comes and processes it, creates more data, documents, etc. And then those documents are sent back to the user, or they're they're pushed along in the workflow, right? But at the same time, you can use this technology to create conversational AIs that, if you can get the right information, marry it with the right prompt, marry it with the right data, then the user can get exactly what they want right then and there without having to wait for it. All of this is good and well, but I can't emphasize enough that, and this is not just in the context of automating business with GPT, this is in the context of any software, whether it's written in Java and Python and JavaScript, or it's done with low code, no code, with AI. It doesn't matter. You still need to map out your work. You still need to have a good design. You still need to have a decent architecture. So the skills you have as a business person, you still need it to draw out the business process. The skills you have as a business analyst to take this and maybe help break it down, you still need to have those skills to maybe clarify what you're asking. And as a technologist, if you're a programmer, even if you give it something very specific and you get an answer back, if you're not a good programmer, you're not going to be able to tell if it's good or bad, right? If you're a good salesperson and the proposal comes back as garbage, you're not going to be able to tell if it's good unless you're a good salesperson. So the better you are at your job, the better you're going to be using automation. The technology isn't going to make you better, although it can answer questions for you. It's like that Bill Gates quote, which I'll leave you with. Any technology is like a magnifying glass. It takes what you're doing, whatever process. If it's bad, it makes it worse much quicker. And if it's good, it makes it better. So with that, I leave you. Thank you so much for your time. I apologize. I went over a little bit from our allocated time, but I'm looking forward to the next talk. I'll take the feedback in the form of comments in the chat. I'll take a look at it. And in the next iteration of no code, data, and AI, I hope to get you deeper into this subject area to use in your business. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon, good morning, and good evening.